So for a card game or something, you might want to shuffle the deck. The randomizer gadget has a shuffling ability. You can tell it to shuffle, which means when the scene starts, it decides on the order it's going to use, and then it will use that order so that it doesn't repeat any of them, and then when it gets to the end, it will just start from the beginning and go through the same order again. So if I put this on to just 3 and use a timer to randomize every bit of a second, then we can see what pattern we get. So we get C, B, A, C, B, A, and you never get the same one twice in a row, and you'd never get C before you've got B and A again, and then you're allowed to get C again. So if I play time again, it will be a different order. Now it's B, A, C, and it will loop around that order. But this only has 10 possible channels. So you can only get like a card ID or whatever from a value between 0 and 9, and that's it. But there are ways of kind of generating a shuffled order of some unique IDs. So I made this shuffler. So if you watch this time, I'll just rewind. So it takes 1.8 seconds to shuffle 52 cards in this example, and then I can draw. So it draws and destroys that ID from the list of IDs that it can choose from, and spits out the actual number that it was. So that was card number 42, so it's given us number 42 to use to do whatever we need to do with that random number, such as like generating an actual playing card or something. So then I'll press X again, and now 30 disappeared, and you get 30, and you keep going, and you get all the individual unique numbers. None of them ever repeat, and it just keeps going until it gets to the bottom of the deck, and it's counting down how many items are remaining. So now it can choose between 5, 8, and 11. There's 11, 8, and 5 that time. But of course, if I try again, then I'll get a completely different order. This actual version that you can find on the Dreamiverse is very fast. It takes 1 frame per item in the shuffle. But I'll do it a slower way because it's a lot easier to explain rather than getting into the like frame by frame stuff. So I'll start off with a chip. So first we need an object to kind of hold the ID that it represents, and also the order it is in the shuffle, so that we can draw the next one in the list. So first I'll make a sculpt. This will allow us to destroy this group using a destroyer, and I will group with it a chip. I'll just group those up. Right, so the way we emit something is using an emitter. So an emitter, if you tweak an emitter, then you have this object to emit. So now if I link it to that, then when it emits stuff, it'll emit that object, a copy of that object. And at the moment it's like giving it velocity and making it physical and stuff. We can turn emit speed off to 0 and put it into once mode so that it will just emit one object every time you power this. We don't get how many objects it emits. We can just emit as many as we like. So normally when you link something to an emitter like that, it disappears because it actually powers off the original copy. So if you go to show hide and turn off preview invisibility, we can see the original version and still edit it and things. First we'll get this to kind of loop so that we can do other logic in this loop as we go as well. To do that, we'll just put it into a timeline like that, and we'll just put the logic in there. You can put any logic you like into a timeline, any gadget, and it will just power that gadget at the right time during the timeline. And you can make that fairly short like that. And now if we put that onto tweak the timeline and put it onto loop, Now when we play time, it'll loop through and keep on emitting more and more. So if we actually add a mover, just so we can see that it's emitting in different places, we'll have it affect the gadget, the actual microchip that it's in, and we'll set it to full strength and stuff. So if we play time, we can see it emitting at intervals these different copies of the same object. I'm going to expand out the timeline with L1 and right, which kind of expands it out widthwise but doesn't actually make the timeline longer. You can just see smaller increments of time in here. And then I can make the timeline shorter so that it'll emit more quickly right next to each other. And then I'll just increase that again. Cool, so we have this piece of logic looping like that. Each time you loop, we want to add one to the count so that we can generate different IDs as we go along. So for that, we'll just use a simple counter. And the timeline has a on-end trigger, which triggers when it gets to the end of the timeline, even if it loops. So then if we watch this counter, give it a large number, then it's increasing as it's emitting stuff like that. And if we make this slower by making the timeline longer, you can see it more clearly. So it's adding one and then adding one and so on. Now we want to give this value to our emitted object over here. So to do that, you can actually use a node and wire the current value, the current count, directly into that node. And I'll just hook it up to a number displayer like that. And I'll tweak the number displayer to be in the scene, which means it'll be next to each box instead of it all being piled up on the screen at the same place. So I'll move it in front of the box and scale it up. So if I play, then nothing's really happening because it's not getting that value because as you can see here, there's no wire going into the emitted object. So to fix that, you'd normally go into the tweak menu and turn on emit with wires like that. And now when you play, they all have wires going back to that same counter, but now they all have the same value. So we actually want just the value that it was being sent at the moment it was emitted. So to do that, we don't need this emit with wires, but we can loop it into itself. So what's happening here? So it's being sent a value, like the actual original object is being sent a value, and then when it's emitted, there's kind of a remnant of that value still in going through this node, and it's still being sent out. So then when it's being sent out, it's getting sent in again. So this kind of stores a value forever, and then when that wire is removed, because when it's emitted it doesn't have that wire, then it just remembers the value that it last had, and then you can use it for different things in this logic. So now we have that value, and it's not going to emit with wires because we turn that off. Then we can see that it keeps that value and kind of stores it in that node. So we have these IDs being generated, but now we want to come up with a random order for these so that they're kind of shuffled. So for that, we'll use a signal generator. So a signal generator normally just goes up and down between these like value ranges and stuff, but we can actually tell it to become random and variable. So when it tries to go up, like now, it actually finds a random value within this range, this max value range. Give it a range between 0 and 1. Then when it goes up, it's going to choose a value between 0 and 1 to go to. And the same thing when it goes down on here. So if we give that a range between 0 and 1, then each time it goes up or down, it's picking a random value between 0 and 1. Now sweep seconds is like how long it takes to get from minimum to maximum or maximum to minimum. So if we set that to 0, it's actually going to do that every frame. It's just going to snap to the new random value. So then we can store that random value in one of these nodes again. So if I copy that up there, that's still got the loop in it, and we can wire that into here, and I'll display the random value sort of below a little smaller, like that, and see what that gives us. So now you can see each of these has a different random value between 0 and 1, but they all have their own distinct unique IDs of these integers. So if we can use this random value to choose the next one of these IDs to produce, then we have that random value is actually shuffling what order these will come out in. First, let's have a controller sensor, and we'll set it onto remote control mode, so that we don't have to possess anything. And then we'll have, when you press X, then we'll do some stuff. So to communicate to all of these emitted objects, we'll have a trigger zone, and we'll set it to scene wide, so it doesn't matter where the block is, it will always find it. And we'll have it look for a tag by clicking on that. And so we'll put a tag in here, and this will be, we'll call it next, because we're kind of giving the command to find the next block that we've emitted. And then we can use up and down on this name part to cycle through the relevant names. So in this case, tags. Just to test, I'll wire that into there. So what will happen is, when this detects that tag, it will output a signal from tag output, which will then power this displayer down the bottom there. So if I leave this trigger zone off and then have it emit some stuff, then when I turn it on, all those tags know that they've been detected, and so they all power their little number displayers there. So that's how we're going to trigger finding the next card. So the way we're going to use that random value, though, is by using an exclusive gate to give it a different priority. So 0.013 will have less priority than 0.830. So I'll give you a quick demo of how exclusive gates work for this. Give an exclusive gate a name. So all the exclusive gates that have the same name are part of the same group, and only one of them can be active at once. And for a gate to become active, it has to have a value being sent into the gate input, like that. So it's become black, that's because it's active. But also it has to have the highest or equal highest priority compared to all of the other gates. So if they both wanted to be active, like that, then the one with the highest priority would win. So the bottom one would win in this case. But then if the top one had a higher priority, then it would win. So we're going to use that functionality to get everything to work in here. So I'll give these names because I'm getting confused about which is which. So this is the ID, and this is the, I'll just call it priority. So this is, if you're thinking of like a deck of cards, then the priority would be how close it is to the top of the deck of cards. So we'll use an exclusive gate in here. We'll give it a name so that it's all part of the same group. So like shuffled ID. So we want our priority to affect the priority of the exclusive gate. So this is the priority. We'll wire that into the priority there, and then we want it to try and open when we send that next command, like that. So we'll have the exclusive gate actually sends a signal telling you that it's active, so we can use that to power this to kind of test out if this one's being selected or not. So let's go and wire X into the trigger zone. Now this won't work so well. If I hold X now, it will just go to the highest priority one that exists currently, but we want that one to declare itself and then disappear. So for that I'm just going to have a variable, because it's easy to test with. This will represent the last selected ID, and then we'll set it in here using the ID that this represents. So we'll wire that into the value and have it set that last selected ID. I'm using up and down again to go through the names. So last selected ID, and we'll have that power when when we're requesting the next ID, and this is the highest priority ID that we have in the list. Then we'll set it to that one, and then we'll destroy. Then we'll destroy this whole object. So I'll power that and have it affect the group. So this applies to all the emitted objects as well. It will have this destroyer affecting the emitted group. So if I emit some objects, now if I hold X, they're all kind of getting destroyed in a random order while I'm holding X, but really we want just one of those to pop out. So let's go and use a signal manipulator to turn X into a pulse, and which just powers the trigger zone for the shortest time it can, which means it will destroy itself and send the command and stuff, and it will just destroy the highest priority ID, but then it will stop doing anything. So we have a bit more control. So if I press X now, however, something to bear in mind about exclusive gates is when they try to open and stuff, and when they get powered and things like that, they actually take a frame to kind of set themselves up. So instead of using an actual pulse from a signal manipulator, we'll use a timeline and put that trigger zone on the timeline so that we can make it last just a little bit longer. So if I make that really short, move that down, and expand it out with L1 and right so we can see more detail of the time. So that would be 1 frame long, and that would be 2 frames long, and then we'll need a little gap as well. Now we'll need to set it to once mode so that each time you press it, it will just play through from the beginning, and then we'll use X to power it. Now if I play time and press X, each time I press X, it's playing through that whole timeline. So now see if that works. So I'll press X and it deleted 1, but 1 alone. 1 only. Cool. And we can go up here and display what that value was. Last selected ID. Take the last selected ID and put it into the range, into the number displayer. So now I'll press X and we're getting a different random value like that. So then if you want to generate a certain number of these IDs in a shuffled manner, you probably want to wait until they're all emitted, and you want to emit a certain number of them. So for that, let's have a trigger zone, and this can be scene wide as well, and that will look for a tag which we'll put into here. So it will just be like a normal tag like that, but we'll give it a different name. We'll just call it ID. So this is looking for how many IDs we have, and if we set that to the number we want, so if we say we want to generate 10 of these, we can put that in there, and this is the number required for it to be classed as detected and send a signal out from air. But it also, this is like the maximum number this number detected can send. So we can actually display how many we've actually generated. So that will display on the left there. So every time one of these is emitted, that goes up because it's counting how many there are. But then it keeps on emitting beyond 10 because we don't actually use it for anything yet. So when this gets to 10, it sends a signal from detected. So when it sends a signal from detected, we've got enough and we can stop emitting this stuff. We can put the other stuff into a chip like that, and when we detect there's enough of the objects emitted, we can use a keyframe to turn off the shuffling stuff like that. Like that. And we can turn that on to keep changes so that it just stays off. So now we play time. So when it gets to 10, then it will shut off and stop emitting new ones. And we can press X to get the next random ID from the shuffled list. But really we don't want to be able to do this while it's still generating the shuffle. So what I'll do instead is use a selector. So a selector has lots of different channels, and only one of them is active and sending a signal at any given time. So when A is sending a signal, which it does by default, we'll power the shuffling logic, and then we'll have another chip that powers the get the next ID logic, and we'll power that with B. So that won't be sending any signals, so it won't be powering this chip. So then later on we want to change it to use the channel B, and we'll do that using detected. And we won't need that keyframe anymore. So now I can press X all I want and nothing happens. But now if I press X, because they've all been generated, I can get the next ID, which is 3, 1, 0, and they're in this shuffled order. So using this with the card generation logic we looked at in the other video, you can use this to shuffle a whole pack of cards, but not have to have every card existing in the scene. And in reality you can destroy these, because you don't need any of those. There's that mover thing. And we don't need to use the mover because they can all just stack on top of each other, and that will still work fine. And I can still get those IDs out. Yeah. I'd like to thank Hemlog, Creator4983, Kolvitzer, and all of my other supporters for making this tutorial possible. Check out TAPgiles.com to find out how you can support me in helping Dreams creators. Thanks for your consideration, and I'll see you in the next one.